Greetings from Bangkok, Thailand, and welcome to the 30 Minutes Promoting Unity in Diversity with Wanayran AlvarezAngerer in Moving Cultures. Our guest, number 142 of the series, is an amazing woman. She has been traveled the world capturing power, energy, and also the real sense of life through her images. And her name is Denisse Ariana Pérez. She's from the Dominican Republic, but she is at the moment based in Barcelona. So, hello, Denisse. What a big pleasure to have you in this conversation. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Yes, I think I'm very excited to talk about my work, but also talk about visions and ways of seeing art and culture. So I'm very, happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Denisse, for accepting the invitation to walk us through your journey of work and also through your personal life. And the first question is, who is Denisse Ariana Pérez?
Well, I am a copywriter, author, and photographer. And I work with words and ideas and concepts and images. And I try to blend them to create stories. And yeah, a lot of my work is based on people. I only photograph people. I don't photograph objects or landscapes. I photograph human beings. And I usually photograph them as they interact with their environment, with nature. A lot of my work is a bit, I would say, therapeutic as well. It touches on emotions and it touches on culture and subculture. So a lot of my work has also been about highlighting beauty. I always say my work is not documentary at all, even though that it has elements of it, because I focus on highlighting beauty. So I could tell a story that is deeper and more serious, but through aesthetic that is more artistic. So I like to combine reality with fantasy, and documentary with the artistic. And that is also a very conscious decision, because I don't like to portray people as victimized people. So there's a lot of communities that I photograph that through Western media, they have been perpetuated as victims or as marginalized communities with tragic stories. And for me, I am more interested in dignifying them and highlighting their beauty and elevating them. So my work, even when I work with marginalized communities, is very focused on that, never in capturing the literal, but adding a bit of poetry to it.
Denisse, you come from the Dominican Republic and you have the opportunity to study and also to connect with people all over the world, including us, because we met in Kenya a couple of years back, through your aunt, who is also working with multicultural communities in the Dominican Republic. Tell me how your upbringing has actually make you understand the power of positivity in marginalized communities, because that's what you actually do through your images.
Yes, I think in many ways, I do think that when people ask me this question, I think that many parts of my upbringing, my work is a rebellion against that, because I grew up in a more conservative society. So I think that there was no celebration of Black bodies, there was no celebration of queerness, there was no celebration of those things. So I always found beauty in those things. So I think it was in the opposite way that my upbringing impacted it, in which my work ended up being a creation of what I wish I had seen rather than what I saw, if that makes sense. So yes.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the powerful element of your work, Denisse, because what you didn't have in your community and your upbringing is something that you were looking out of it. And this is about your journey in other communities and other parts of the world? How do that traveling and those connections actually give you the opportunity to have a loud voice about your thinking?
Absolutely. I think traveling was eye-opening in so many ways, but also understanding, I think it made me more optimistic about the world. And I was always an optimist, always. I'm like a compulsive radical optimist. But it really made me fall in love with the world and actually solving the connections between different parts. I think people, yes, there's different cultures and different places, but there is so much that we have in common. But as well, for me, it was also important to travel to very distinct and far-fetched and contrasting places. I think contrast is very important. And experiencing languages and cultures that are the absolute opposite of maybe what you have experienced, I think it's incredibly important, and linguistically also. So I love languages, so I had to learn, or I wanted to learn many other languages. And I think I could feel how my brain would expand by learning. For example, I had to learn German in high school because I moved to Switzerland. And it was like, I could feel the expansion of my brain and my perception of language. And I ended up working with writing as well. So that made me fall in love with language more. And I think traveling to places that I think, for example, I traveled a lot throughout Africa, which a lot of people wouldn't do, and they're so stigmatized. But for me, I fell in love with the continent. I wanted to explore, you know, being an Afro-descendant person. And I think I wanted to see Africa in my own eyes, not with the romanticism of, oh, a part of my ancestors came from here, but also because I wanted to observe it in its presence and its reality, and absolutely find beauty in it. So I went to places where most people wouldn't decide to go, and I think that is powerful. I think traveling to places, I think that is more interesting to me in traveling than just going to a predictable place. Both are important, I think, but that one, I find it to be more powerful. It's very, yeah.
You also have a very strong connection with nature, and it's very visible at the moment that you capture your story, because it's the person, is the circumstances, but I see on your work the nature, you know, not only as a background, but as a living element in the composition of your work.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that developed through my adult years. I think the more I connected to nature in a spiritual way, I would say, the more I wanted others to experience nature as well, and especially photographically, because it can be in my photos, I try to make people connect with themselves or feel a bit liberated, and that is not always easy to do in the context of in an urban context. And a lot of times I like to remove them from their immediate context and isolate them in nature, and then I can guide them into breathing into nature, into connecting to nature. So nature has become not a backdrop, as I said, but as a co-protagonist in my photos.
Yeah, and it's very clear. Another thing that I also have observed in your work is the capacity you have to allow the subject of the photography to be comfortable with its image. It's like you become like a mirror for them, and they discover a lot of things about themselves, their physical and also emotional and psychological and mental state. How do you do that?
It's interesting because most of the people I photograph, they are not models. So they're real people. And a lot of them have never posed for an image, apart from taking a selfie. And others, they really have never been photographed. And I find that more interesting. I think there's something more raw there. And a lot of times they are surprised to why I'm interested in them. But I always say that when I photograph in my process, it's a mixture almost of a therapy class, a breathing yoga class, and a movement class, because I breathe with them. I need to make them feel comfortable. Sometimes people don't see this, but I meet certain people beforehand, like days before, and we go for a coffee. We engage, we talk with one another, and then we end up photographing. Because for me, creating a space of intimacy is extremely important when I'm photographing. And in order to create that trust and that intimacy, I wouldn't get people to look the way they do in my photographs if there was no trust and no intimacy. So a lot of times I also photograph with an analog camera. I don't photograph with a digital camera. And I think that helps in that process because they cannot see what I'm doing. People have a tendency of, they need to see how the image is looking. And they're like, show me how I'm looking so I know what I'm doing. And I'm like, no, you cannot see it and I cannot see it. So it takes more trust, because none of us can see what's happening. It's just about being present and in the moment. And it's beyond the images. The images are just the images. And we're going to see them months after when I develop them.
Another thing that I noticed in your work, Denisse, is that there is a lot of movement. And when I talk about movement, it's not the pose, it's about the way the people look, the way the body is delivering a message. Let's go through some of your photographs so people can understand what we're talking about, okay? And let's start with you here. And this recent exhibition that, as we were talking before, is connected with nature, and not as a backdrop, but as a protagonist on this composition.
Yeah, that was an exhibition I had at a photo festival in Bilbao in the northern part of Spain. And it was very special because my work was printed, it was above 2 meters, and it was placed alongside a natural space. So it was a hillside and it was quite remote. And it was so beautiful because there was only a little village there. And they were very thankful that art or something beautiful was brought to where they lived. So these prints, they were placed alongside a trail. And these images are about my first book that is called Agua, which means water. And it was beautiful to see the work position against water. You can hear the river in the backdrop. That was quite special. So it really felt like it was where the work was meant to be exhibited. It's the first time I see it exhibited this way, and also outside of a museum or a gallery. So it was quite special.
Fantastic. There is a festival called the Gazili Festival that one of the settings is in a small village in Austria, who specialize in bringing photographs of high dimensions in context with the nature, exactly the way this one you will portray. I will send you some other links so you can know about it. Okay.
Amazing.
What's happening here?
Well, here, this is a series that I recently started in the south of Spain, and it's quite different from the others, the first one that you showed, because in those I'm taking people more on a process and of letting go, and it's more meditative. And in these ones I have to think very quickly. I I need to create intimacy in a very short time, because these people are actually going to the beach and they are there with their families. It's more like street photography, but trying to make it a bit more empathetic and a bit more intimate. So this was in Cadiz, and it's a beach where a lot of families go to spend the day in the summer. And this woman was going to the beach to do that. So I started a series about capturing people and generations and families in the Mediterranean in the summer, and trying to capture these relationships, bonds. It's like social observation, but at the same time a bit closer.
Yeah, I also noticed that in your work there is several processes that are being taken into consideration. Your personal process as an artist and as a person, as a human being, and also how you've been developing your personality through the years, and then how you work with the other artists or the other models or other elements that you are capturing in your visuals. Okay, let's talk about this.
Also, one last thing about the previous image is that I always ask people permission before I photograph them. So they are aware that a photograph is being taken, and which is very unusual in street photography because I like to get very close. So I think in order to get as close as I want it to be as consensual as I want to. And I want the people to be part of it. So this woman knows that I'm behind her taking a photograph of her.
Yeah, and this is what I talk about when I said that it's part of your own process also as a professional, you know, to deal with certain values and also ethical commitments, right?
Yeah. So this series is called Pink and Freckled, and it was quite a spontaneous shoot, and I shot it in Portugal, and it was about two bodies that they were both slightly redheaded and very freckled, and I wanted to highlight the beauty of their skin. And we got these apples because yellow apples are usually freckled as well, and we just created this space where everything was freckled, and there was beauty in this skin. So yeah, this was the first time that he was photographed in that way, and I photographed him with another friend. So I also, as you said, I am very interested in movement. He has never been in this position before, but guiding people who are not dancers to explore their bodies, to explore movement, to explore. One of them told me, this is absolutely outside of my comfort zone. I'm comfortable, but I am completely uncomfortable at the same time because I have never been in these positions, and my job is to ease them and to breathe into these poses and to move, and for me to find something within their own natural movement, because I asked them to kind of move more freely as well. So yeah.
And you also, as we discussed before, you're highlighting the diversity in people, you know, and also on making people understand that we are one besides our differences.
Yeah, the same here. It's highlighting his beautiful skin and the diversity of how skin can look. And as I said, I like to get very close. So I love the abstraction of the body as well. I don't always show faces. I think there's so much that can be said without showing a face. I think sometimes a face can be too literal, or people are very fixated on faces. And I think there's so much of a story you can tell by through the abstraction of the body as well. This one was very special, actually, this photo shoot, because these two young boys, I met them on the subway, in Barcelona, and I started talking to them. A lot of the people I meet, I cast them on the street or literally on a bus. And they are two gender fluid boys or people. And I photographed them interacting. I asked them who were the people in their lives that really impacted them. And we went through a psychological exercise of them recreating these people. For one of them, it was his grandmother and his mother, and for the other one was his grandfather and his grandmother. And they found their clothes and they dressed as them, and they had to pose with their portraits. And at the end of that shoot, they had to pose as themselves. And so here they are, posing as themselves as they are outside of those familiar bonds. So there was a lot of tenderness. They met actually during the pandemic and developed a beautiful friendship. And they both live in a small town where there's barely any queer people. So they found each other. So it was a very beautiful story.
Yeah, this is also in another aspect of the work you do, Denise. This is a performance, where you actually use some props, costumes, you have a script, because it's in order for you, it's like to do a still movie, when you're telling your stories or your photographs.
Yeah, so in this one you can see him as a child, because I asked them to bring portraits of the family members that impacted them and of themselves as children. And this was his portrait as a child. And then this was the other person, but dressed as his grandmother, who absolutely loved him, and she died. And they had to incarnate their character. So for example, his grandmother was very loving and tender, and the other grandmother of the other person was central and tough. So they really had to recreate and reflect about those traits and those personality traits of these people. And obviously it's not always easy, because people who have impacted us can impact us lovingly, but also in a very harsh way. So it was a beautiful meditation and reflection about especially what it feels like to be an outcast within a more traditional family structure, and especially for them being queer. So it was a reflection that I think many people can connect. Any child that has felt like they were very different from the norm. And I connect with that a lot. So it was a beautiful, it was a very beautiful therapeutic experience for the three of us.
Okay, so this is like what we call a role playing into the psychological connections. Okay, so and here is the grandmother again, right?
Yeah, here's a grandmother as well.
Fantastic.
And again, introducing a bit of movement as well, because obviously his grandmother didn't sit this way. But I think it was more the recreation of certain energies and emotions rather than this is literally how my grandmother felt.
Yeah, and I think there might be a little element of mysticism, at the moment that you do this kind of work, because this image is very powerful, and it tells a lot. It's like tiredness can be dissection, can be so many things that women in certain moments go through, or men as well, but they're not able to express it in this physical system. Okay.
Yeah. So this one is from my book, Agua, and the book talks about the relationship and interaction of people with water. And I went on a journey through different parts of Africa, and then I wanted to go to Asia actually, but the pandemic happened. And then I finished the series in Scandinavia, where I was at the moment. And so it was a beautiful pilgrimage, let's say, from south to north, and exploring the universality of water, but also the universality of bodies. And yeah, they're both, water is so diverse and so are people. And this series, I photographed this wonderful painter, and he is half Danish, half Nigerian. And there's a beautiful story behind this image, because I asked him to bring some canvas to paint on, and he brought it, but he forgot his brushes and his paint. So he only brought the canvas. And I asked him when we were there, I was like, "Will you mind painting with your hands and with the mud in the swamp?" And he was like, "No, I would love to, and I would prefer to." So he painted that with his hands and the mud underneath him. And that was quite special.
Very powerful.
This was taken in Istanbul, which is one of my favorite cities to photograph. There's a part of my work, like the previous one, that is it's a process. And this one is so much more spontaneous, and it really requires me. I behave very differently when I'm in the street and I am navigating and I'm looking. And in Istanbul, I was very fascinated by the presentation of the older men there. In a lot of my work, I photograph a lot of men, and I'm very fascinated by showcasing masculinity in many different forms. And in Istanbul, the older men and their traditional suits really capture me. So I have an entire series around that. So this is just a glimpse of that. This was again in Istanbul. And again, there's an element of culture, but also of culture through food, but also through garments. I'm very interested. I love observing clothing and how it fits the body, especially how people style it and put it together. And I'm always observing those details.
Yeah, and also it has a texture. You can actually feel the texture.
Absolutely. And here as well, this was Istanbul. And what I love about the city is just full of contrast. There's just traditional and contemporary. And then in one frame, you could have something like this, and it's a young generation, and next to someone more traditional. And to me, this image embodies Istanbul very well.
Yeah, and it actually also tells about the tolerance in this specific image, how they can peacefully coexist.
Exactly, they both coexist, and I think that is also powerful as well. And this image is from my first solo exhibition, which was in Amsterdam, and this wonderful, it's a bookstore, but it's also a gallery space called Mendo, and it's at the Hotel L'Europe in Amsterdam, which is probably, I think, the oldest hotel there. And and they showcase many images from my book Agua there, and they were also selling my book, which was so special. So the first images were taken in Senegal, and these ones were as well in different parts of Senegal.
Okay.
This one in particular was taken in Uganda. No, this was in Togo. And again, even in my street photography, I'm not capturing what is literally there. I play with reality a lot. So this was a woman who actually was buying a watermelon, and she had it in another position where she was standing almost like a child. And I asked her if I could photograph her with her watermelon, but sitting down. And I moved the watermelon a little bit. So it's playing. I always say that I'm observing what is there, and I am playing a bit with it, but it is using what is around me.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, Denisse, food, environment, clothing, it has to do with the capacity to be nurtured.
Yeah,
you know, and I think this
absolutely.
is what you practically managed to get and also to share with us.
Yeah. And here it's also part of my Agua series. And this one was taken in another part of Senegal. And for me, as I mentioned, I photographed, I think 70 or 80% of my work, I showcase men. And I think that for a while, I wanted to really challenge the way specifically of how Black men were portrayed. And I wanted to showcase them in a more sensitive way, in a more liberated way, in a way that they only didn't look strong and fit or as sex symbols or as bodies, but I wanted to break that, and I wanted to showcase Black men and yeah, showcasing a different form of visual vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And I love to photograph duos and trios. I love to bring two people together and so to show a different form of, not only to show duality, but I think it's easier sometimes to make someone loosen up or disarm themselves or liberate themselves with another person. Mm-hmm. So that has been a very interesting journey to do that with especially men who might not be used to having to be confronted with another one and having to not behave in a traditional masculine way. So this has been it's something I love doing, and like mm-hmm. this disarming of masculinity. And yeah, it's a very beautiful thing to observe. It can be very controversial. I've had reactions from men really in an aggressive way, questioning if I'm trying to feminize men, and mm-hmm. especially African men, and if I'm trying to homosexualize them, which I'm not. It's a proof of how much work it needs to be done, but I love that challenge of it's more expected to see pictures of women feeling disarmed from their bodies and very free in their bodies and together.
I think you managed to confront men with their femininity, because we all as human beings are dual in our persona, yeah. But not many people is aware of it. And I think these images are to go straight to the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially because I'm dealing, these were taken in more traditional countries, and also these are heterosexual men. So like this is breaking, is expected in a queer environment, but that's not what I'm looking for. I'm also in that environment, but I'm interested in what can be done within a heteronormative heterosexual environment as well, and with people within that realm. So yeah, and these two wonderful guys, they were dancers, and I met them in Saint Louis in Senegal, which is like such a musical, vibrant town in Senegal. And a funny thing is that the day before this photo shoot, I dreamt that I needed a horse. Like I was like, I need a horse for this photograph. And when we went to the location the day after, this white horse was just there, mm-hmm. perfectly. It was so mystical and beautiful. It was like a gift from the universe. Yeah. And also I style all my photo shoots, most of them. So I go to the markets, or I bring the clothing to the countries, and I will collaborate with a designer or a small sustainable brand. But so I also need to style and produce my shoots. So I had bought these fabrics, and a horse appeared the next day with the same color of the fabric.
And I think that's also has to do with the mysticism of your work, yeah. Because you actually engage in such a deep and also mystical way that things that you require are always available for you. And I don't think this is the first time that you find this kind of situations or experiences, when you're visualizing a certain image or a certain work, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think I lead a very mystical life. So I think it's just, I believe in signs and and symbols, and that's why I like to use or reinterpret what I see, because I do think that there is something deeper and mystical behind what is in the physical realm. So I like to play with I like to play with all those elements. And here as well, it's playing with symbols, it's playing with nature, with bodies. And I think this is my favorite from that series, this image in particular.
Yeah, and it also shows the power and the femininity, the animal, as we are. We are animals, and we are asexual, you know, until the moment society give us certain roles, you know. But the reality is that without prejudice and without people telling us how we're supposed to dress or how we're supposed to behave, we will be like that, isn't it?
For sure, for sure. And it's just such tenderness as well. Again, here, I think there's such tenderness, and again, I think common threads in my work would be movement and abstraction, but there's also intimacy and tenderness. And here I said, this was for a photo shoot I did for a sustainable brand. So I've been lucky to work with some brands that work in more sustainable ways, which I'm connected to their values, and they do wonderful dry hair, they're dry shampoos and dry solid shampoos and solid conditioners, but they don't use water to be produced, or very little. And I did this campaign for them, and I got to cast my own models, and I always tried to showcase diverse bodies when I photograph and challenge the typical models that are seen. So even though this was for a brand, it really feels like myself. Yes, so I also, with my commercial work, I tried to really inject it with not only my voice, but a little bit of my values as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that becomes really your brand as well.
Exactly, exactly. This one was such a special shoot. This was it was for my master's program that I just finished in Barcelona, from a school called Elisava, and I was photographing in the Museum of Contemporary Catalan Art, and it was also empowering to have someone like him, who is a queer young person of Filipino descent, and photographing him in this institution of Catalan art. There was something very powerful and political about that, but it was a photo series that was meant to talk about the impact of climate change in the world, but I wanted to specifically talk about the impact of climate change in islands, because island nations are bearing the brunt of climate change. So I wanted to showcase a person that actually came from a Pacific island, and he did his own makeup. He's a wonderful performer. And I wanted a makeup that showed a bit of something theatrical, but at the same time that showcased a little bit of somberness and a little bit of gloom, because it's not a happy matter to be slowly being killed literally by climate. So it was a very special shoot, because it was talking about something deeper, but he was such a beautiful artist and really invoked that. And here as well, then what he's wearing around his face is paper. So I was talking about, waste. And I didn't want to use plastic, but then we found paper to use and created something that looked, again, theatrical yet aesthetic, yet at the same time, it's talking about something deeper at the same time.
And this is the last photo of our series.
Well, that's a picture of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, Denisse, we're going now back to the main screen, but with this photo, we also present to the public, how you really are in synchrony with your beliefs, in synchrony with your practices, and every day trying to understand more who you are, your roots, connecting with a cosmovision that goes beyond your nationality, and it becomes more global. And my request now for you will be to have a message for the new generation in society about inclusion, diversity, and unity.
Yes, I think that inclusion or diversity are key. I think that if we don't have diversity and inclusion around us in our immediate space, then we have the internet, and we should aim to use it for good, to be curious about the world, to be curious about other lives. So only by really looking and giving value to other people's lives and existences, we can not only learn, but we can learn to empathize. And I think that that is the most important thing. I think empathy in a global level, and a human level, and a natural level is absolutely key. But I think to get to empathy, we need to have curiosity about the other, and understanding that, yes, we are connected, but I think we should be curious, because curiosity is a way of saying, I care about learning about you. And we are in a pandemic, so many of us cannot travel at this moment, but I think that there's so much we can learn about culture and about diverse lives and diverse experiences. Is at the tip of our fingers, and we can use the internet for that until we can travel again and travel more consciously. And I think engaging in a more profound conversation with people who live very different lives than ours. Mm-hmm. And reading, I think reading, two of my best friends, we started to read together, like books of queer authors, of color, like of people who existed in very different bodies than ours, people who actually were claiming to their fatness, or there was so many things, just to try to put yourself in another person's shoes. And literature is amazing for that, and so is art. And and there's so many wonderful documentaries today to watch. So I think if we cannot do it on our physical element because we grow up in a more homogenous society, immediate society, I don't think that that's an excuse. I think we can have a lot of empathy through a distance as well. So that would be my advice, to cherish and to nurture a sense of empathy for the other. And empathy can lead to inclusion.
Denisse, thank you. I'm sending you a big hug all the way from Bangkok. And
I'm sending you one back.
And looking forward to see you in the near future. Thank you for promoting unity and diversity through your philosophy, your work, and your way of living. And keep shining.
Thank you. And you as well. Thank you for creating this space and for connecting so many voices, and just promoting more empathy and unity.
Thank you, Denisse. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.